Anybody see that story this week in the news about that community meeting in Saline that erupted into a racial shouting match? Earlier this week, a gathering, for those of you who didn't, the gathering was convened among parents to talk about online bullying in the area. Apparently some students and ethnic minorities were being harassed. And at that meeting, a Mexican-American man, a businessman, owns 3 restaurants in the area, stood up in this room crowded with parents to tell how his children, who had recently graduated, had been mocked and had been picked on because of their Latino heritage. In the midst of his talk, a heckler then spoke up, and he said, "Why then didn't you all just go back to Mexico?" The ensuing shout-down and disgust among parents quieted that man down. Various local and national outlets have done stories on this incident, and one Saline High School senior told a reporter that she really wasn't surprised by the comment because, quote, "Everybody in Saline is mostly white. I didn't really experience any of those hardships because I'm a white female. But I'm not surprised that this would happen because Saline is not diverse at all." Now this incident comes to mind not just as you and I contemplate the salt and the light, those themes in our gospel today, but because the book that we're reading and discussing during Black History Month is this book, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And that has us too, I think, evaluating our attitudes about race, about how racism continues to be a problem in our area and in our day and age, and how you and I are called to be salt and be lights in the pervasive problems that continue in our society. Our gospel reading, one all of us know, Jesus teaching us. In this passage, we hear about Jesus talking about everyday items, about salt, about light, and we know what salt and light are used for, to add flavor and seasoning, as well as to illuminate. Salt fails in its job when it is either diluted or it is not applied. You can't flavor a pot of stew with 1 grain of salt, or when you forget to add the salt at all. Light does no good when it's not allowed to shine. Can't turn the light on in the bedroom and then crawl under the covers and expect to read. This is all to say that Jesus wants you and me not to be diluted and not to be hidden. Jesus does not want us drowned out or covered over. No, the gist of his advice and of the gospel is articulated in our people's window in the back there. Go ye into all the world. It's to season and to shine, to step up to the microphone, to get under the spotlight, to get up and to go out. Jesus wants us to stand up, to speak out, to take action. Jesus wants us to learn and to grow and to increase in our understanding both of God and of God's world. And when it comes to racial inequity, something that Jim Wallace talked about when we read that book last year, the title of his book, America's Original Sin. The answer is not to shrug off racism and hope it goes away. It's not to be deflated by comments like that high school seniors and give up on racial healing because we live in an area that's not diverse at all. No, in our getting up and our going out, you and I are called to be educated and increase in our knowledge. We are called to do the work of healing and reconciling like Jesus. And as this incident of racial tension here in Michigan and our readings show us, there is much work, my brothers and sisters, for us to do. For those of us who have made good headway into this book, White Fragility, we are learning how racial majorities, consciously or unconsciously, set the tone, shape the society. We're learning how racial majorities blatantly or discreetly shape that society in favor of the majority's self-interest. Now, I like to remind us that this happens regardless of the country or of the skin colors involved. The majority is going to make certain rules and set in place certain assumptions and behave in certain ways based on their majority position. So it works regardless of skin color, and it ultimately talks more about who we are as humans and how we address difference. When I visited Dubai, it wasn't black and white, it was Arab and Pakistani. I mean, we can paint this in this scenario over and over in our world today. In the United States, where whites are the majority, we're 64.7%. Currently, 100% of the top richest 10 people in America are white. 90% of Congress is white. 100% of the president, the vice president, and his top military advisors are white. 96% of governors are white. 93% of the people who decide which TV shows we watch are white. 90% of the people who decide which books we read are white. 95% of the people who decide which music we listen to are white. And again, cultural makeup, 64.7% white and shrinking. Why is this so? Well, some people have argued, some people still believe that there's this biological basis for this, that the color of one's skin is an outward sign of an inward genetic deficiency. People of color are just inherently inferior. This would make it easy to believe that the divisions we see in society are just natural. But of course we know that race is not biological. It is social. It is socially constructed. Under the skin, there's no difference between us. There is no true biological race. We all know that any external characteristics that we use to define race, be they skin color, eye shape, hair texture, external use. Race, as biology, is a total fallacy. The social construction of race, then, as we see it in the U.S., is something that the majority has been able to shape. That's what majorities do. It's very strong, always done in the majority's image and favor. Few of us doubt that there's certain advantage that whites have in the U.S. What happens as a result of this advantage is an internalized sense of superiority, of entitlement. And it becomes the water we swim in as we're socialized, the air the kids breathe, that makes them into the adults who are in charge of things and perpetuate this inequity. Ever look at a fish swimming around the tank and wonder if that fish knows he's wet? Probably not. Same dynamic. We whites in the majority are usually unconscious of these advantages. I was in a meeting the other day. 3 white people, black person. Subject was gardening. And one of the white people was just talking about gardening. He said, oh, you know, some people are good at gardening, but not me. I just have a black thumb. That was my reaction, too. And the black woman just goes, huh? You know. And the woman who said this, she didn't hear the objection. It didn't go anywhere on her radar. She kind of tried to laugh it off, but as I say, she never picked it up. She didn't hear that reaction, was never conscious that what was said in innocence was not received that way. So what whiteness rests upon the foundational premise that white is the norm or standard for humans, and people of color are a deviation from that. Robin DiAngelo in this book writes that this is why whiteness is not easily acknowledged by white people. In part because the white reference point is assumed to be universal. What color are Band-Aids? Right? We white people find it very difficult to think about whiteness as a specific state of being that could have an impact on one's life and perspective. Think about that famous baseball player, Jackie Robinson. DiAngelo reminds us that he was widely known as the first African American to break the color line and play Major League Baseball. Obviously, he's a great ball player, but we forget that there were black baseball leagues in Robinson's era as well, and that there were probably very good black baseball players before Jackie Robinson, maybe even better ones. So that there's a subtext to Robinson's accomplishment as it's understood in our white-dominated society. That Robinson was actually the first black man that whites allowed to play in the major leagues. Why do we have Black History Month and not White History Month? Well, because the other 11 months are already White History Month. We are wise to realize that by virtue of our numbers and influence, whites control all of the major institutions of society and set the policies and practices that others must live by. We set the tone. And we need to not only understand that reality, but we need to understand how it affects us. We are wise to conclude that this certainly has a deep-seated and pervasive impact on the way our attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs are formed. And the way this is internalized is often so submerged that it's never consciously considered or challenged by most whites. I always recommend to people that they take the Harvard Implicit Test. Anybody here ever taken your Harvard Implicit Test? You can just Google it, Harvard Implicit, and a bunch of tests will pop up that you can take on your computer. You can take it in terms of your implicit bias towards race, towards size, skinny people and not skinny people. You can take it with the number of Asian Americans, white Americans, etc., and it will help you understand your racial attitude better. This short computer test helps us see just how deep-seated these tendencies about racial preference can be. Now, when I take the test, I don't do as well as I'd like. The results show me that I have a preference for whites that is higher than I'd like it to be. I can honestly say I'm embarrassed by my tendencies to favor whites over blacks. I don't like to face them. I don't like to admit them. But I also know that racial healing has to involve pain. If you're squirmy hearing this sermon as I am giving it, then we're beginning to make some progress. D'Angelo writes this: the racial status quo is comfortable for white people, and we will not move forward in race relations if we remain comfortable. The key to moving forward is what we do with that discomfort. Am I going to pull that lady aside in that meeting and say, you really should probably, think about that comment and how that might be repaired, that microaggression might be repaired. D'Angelo's got a great last chapter of that book where she talks about an incident in her life where she said something similar and how she went about repairing it. Another story, when one of my kids was 2 and saw a black person in the grocery store, he said, "Look, that lady has brown skin." Out of impulse, I quieted the child down and said that it wasn't a polite comment. But my child persisted. But her color really is brown. Now, how would I have reacted if my child had said, "Daddy, look how pretty that woman is"? Why did I have to react as if skin color, especially black skin color in this case, was something not to be celebrated? Personally, I try to sit with this discomfort, and I try not to feel guilty because I have to understand that most of my racially insensitive attitudes are ingrained in me by the white society that socialized me. But I can't stop here because that's not what being salt and light is about. When Jesus so adamantly uses these terms to describe you and to describe me, it's out of a deep sense of a mission that's rooted in love. That's ultimately the God we serve. And love is not always easy. God loves the world. God sees its disorder regarding a host of things, especially race, and asks us to do our part. I think one of the gifts we have as a diverse congregation is to talk frankly and honestly and painfully about what it means to really love one another. To really love one another. So we ask, what is the cure to this specifically? Don't we wish there was a magic pill or a secret switch that we could hit? Rather, racial healing is a lifelong journey of ongoing commitment to self-awareness, to education, to relationship building, and actual anti-racist practice. Now, this is why I think our parish is so devoted to this. Every year we read a book that's going to poke a button for us, that's going to be difficult for us to get through. My prayer is that Jesus would give us strength to live into our call to season and to illuminate, to heal and to reconcile, that racial justice may one day be a thing